Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first of our Living with Lions lecture series. My name is Deborah Chase, and I'm the CEO at the Mountain Lion Foundation, where we are dedicated to ensuring that America's lion survives and flourishes in the wild. Today's special presentation features Mark Elbroch, author of The Cougar Conundrum, Sharing the World with a Successful Predator, an issue that is becoming more and more critical every day. Mark is an internationally recognized expert on carnivores and cougars and is currently director for Panthera's Puma program and a member of the Foundation's Science Advisory Council. As a working biologist, Mark often finds himself caught in the middle of opposing opinions about mountain lions. On the one hand, he's been called soulless for enslaving mountain lions for research, and on the other, a liberal tree hugger for advocating for reducing mountain lion hunting. This unique combination provides him the distinctive vantage from which he wrote this book. Joining Mark is Denise Peterson. Denise is the Foundation's Western Region Coordinator located in Utah. She works in several Western states in the Midwest and in Florida. She is also the Foundation's Media Production Specialist, GIS Analyst, and a talented wildlife videographer and photographer with a background in wildlife science focusing on mountain lions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mark and Denise for a conversation about cougars.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Deborah. I'm really excited to be here with Dr. Elbroch. Thanks for joining us, Mark. To let everyone know, there will be a Q&A session following our discussion where you can ask Dr. Elbroch questions directly. We ask that you keep questions brief so we have time to fit in as many as possible. To ask your questions, you will need to use the hand raise feature at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat window to let us know if you are experiencing any technical difficulties whatsoever so we can assist you in resolving them. Dr. Elbroch, thank you again for being here. I wanted to let you know that I greatly enjoyed reading your latest book, The Cougar Conundrum, Sharing the World with a Successful Predator. And I think many of the folks attending this webinar will as well. You'd mentioned that you wrote the book in about 6 months. Why do you think you were able to write it so quickly?
Yeah, it's a deeply personal book and hopefully written in a fairly impersonal way. So, you know, it was sort of a process to learn how to write it. And Aaron Johnson, the editor for the book, was really super helpful in coaching me and kind of coming up with a structure. But once I had that, it just sort of came right out of me. I mean, it's just, you know, these are all the things that have been bubbling in my head for so long. And, you know, I just needed a venue to kind of share some of my thoughts. And, you know, one thing I would emphasize is that I often get asked questions, some of which are in the book. You know, what do you think about hunting? What do you think about hound hunting? What do you think about mountain lions? Are they in danger? Blah, 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 on and on and on. And that you just can't answer those things in 50 characters in a tweet or even a Facebook post. It actually requires to write a book, so.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of really good and interesting points in the book, and a lot of things that I'd wondered about too, you know, in our work. Chapter 1 takes a look at misconceptions about mountain lions. What are some of the common misconceptions about these cats and how do they compare to reality? Can you maybe talk about some of your experiences with mountain lions?
Sure. Misconceptions the list is long and varied, but some of the big ones I'd say are that mountain lions are all the same. And that's a really important one because it influences how we manage them, how we conserve them, how people perceive them. But mountain lions are actually individual animals with different personalities, different strengths, different weaknesses. And it's so not true that they are all the same. A lot of folks just think that mountain lions are out to get them, that they are naturally aggressive and ferocious. That, again, is just not true. They are a timid, very cautious species that does almost everything to avoid confrontation. You know, I often compare them with bobcats because bobcats are much more aggressive as an animal. You know, you think twice about getting into a small enclosure with a bobcat, but I do that with mountain lions all the time and without much trepidation. They're just a very calm species. I mean, the misconceptions are on and on that they're loners, that they kind of live alone, that they're born killing machines. No, that's not true either. They have to actually learn how to hunt. Some are better than others. Some learn different skills than others. They have interactions with their neighbors with regularity. And, I think the evidence is mounting that mountain lions actually require communities on some level to survive in the wild, and that they can never be viewed as individuals living alone, separate from other mountain lions in the wild. So that's just a few.
Yeah, that's interesting. On our camera traps, we've actually had a couple of cats show up within a day or even a few hours of one another. So that's definitely something that we're observing here too. So say that a mountain lion wanders into a populated area. Often people ask if the cat can be relocated. Can you explain maybe the difference between translocation and relocation, as well as some of the challenges that these options pose for mountain lions?
Sure. So those words, and they're words, and this comes up a couple of times in the book, that words get in the way of conversation a lot, and certainly get in the way of understanding. And so there are people that use relocation and translocation interchangeably. There are others that prefer to categorize one versus the other. And those folks tend to think that translocation would infer that moving a mountain lion from, say, a good habitat to another good habitat. It's often used as a strategy in kind of rebuilding an animal population. So if it's mountain lions, perhaps Florida would be a good example. You bring cats to Florida to help that population grow and to become more genetically diverse. So that would be translocation. Relocation, again, slightly splitting hairs here, might be defined as moving an animal from poor habitat to good habitat. So basically, differentiating between, there is no option. This cat is not where it should be or where it wants to be, and we're gonna move it into a habitat where it should have a better chance of survival. So that being the slight difference between translocation and relocation. But again, you're gonna meet lots of folks that use those words interchangeably.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges associated with moving a lion, either saying relocating or translocating a cat to a different area? What are some of the challenges associated with that?
Yeah, moving cats is super controversial. We have a lot of baggage that we kind of carry into this conversation. A lot of folks have assumptions about relocation or translocation that aren't necessarily true. So in general, you hear state agencies are quite adamantly against moving mountain lions around. And the assumption is that the cat has no chance of survival, that it will have a territorial conflict with a resident that lives in the new location, so it will die. And so given the fact that chances of survival are low, why do it at all? Especially in our society, which is so litigious. So for instance, if a cat kills a chicken and you were to move that to a new area, what if it kills a chicken again? Is that state agency then responsible for that cat, or should they have, for instance, made a public service announcement to the new area that, oh, we're just releasing a cat that has killed a chicken before? And so there's this uncertainty in who's responsible for the behavior of wild animals, which is crazy. Of course, state agencies should not be responsible for the behavior of wild animals, but some people think they should be. And so there's fear on the state agency's part that is certainly legitimate, because there have been people who have sued counties over postings of mountain lions. They've sued agencies over different things they've done. So it is a legitimate fear, plus with this sort of baggage that they have no chance of survival. And I guess, I could speak on that a little bit more. There's been hardly any research at all on moving mountain lions and their success in the wild thereafter. Most folks cite a single study from, I think it was the late 80s, but Tony Ruth, I think, was the lead author, but it was Ken Logan and Linda Sweener, Morris Hornacher. It's from their work down in the White Sands in New Mexico. And they moved 14 cats, 14, that's it, to about 300 miles on average to northern part of the state. They released them. And of those 14, I think I can remember some of the numbers, 8 of them immediately started going south, back towards where they had come from. 2, in fact, made it all the way back 300 miles to the study area. 1 took 6 months, another took a year and a half to reach there. 5 of those cats died over the next 2 years that they were monitored, and 5 were killed by other mountain lions. 1 cat lost a collar. 4 of them established new ranges. 2 of them bred in the 2-year period where they were monitored and had kittens in their new area where they were released. And so based on literally 14 cats, everyone says, well, we've done this, we know what we're doing, we know all the consequences for mountain lions. But I would counter and say that, you know, there are actually, there is evidence that we can successfully move mountain lions, and Florida being the clearest case. You know, you look at Florida, we've moved mountain lions to Florida from Texas twice. The first, they were released and then actually recollected again quite quickly because they started going into areas where people were worried about conflict. But in the second case, it was quite strategic. It followed a lot of debate, and they brought 8 female mountain lions, young females, and they released them in pairs in southern Florida where there were known mountain lions, Florida panthers. And for those who aren't yet aware that those are the exact same animal, mountain lion, Florida panther, those are the same animal. And they brought them in because the Florida cats were suffering genetic erosion. You know, they were losing their diversity within the population and showing facial deformities, kinks in their tails, and were destined to doom, you know, essentially. And so after great debate, they said, let's bring in these females. Every one of them produced kittens in the wild, intermixed with that community. Then they were recaught thereafter and brought out of the system again. I don't know why they didn't decide to leave them, but they didn't. They allowed their kittens to stay. And so today's Florida panthers are a mixture of, you know, several inputs of mountain lions, but one of them is the successful moving and releasing of 8 female mountain lions in southern Florida. So I think, you know, what I would encourage folks to really think about is that the type of mountain lion you move, a female versus a male, a young versus an old, an injured versus a healthy, really impacts its potential survival in a new system. Research kind of around the world has shown that moving carnivores, whether it's a grizzly bear, a tiger, a mountain lion, is more likely to fail than it is to succeed, that's just the reality. And that we have to kind of be set up for a discussion in which, you know, perhaps only 40% of mountain lions that we move will actually succeed in surviving and establishing a new range and integrating into a new community. And so then the question is that enough? Is saving 1 in 3 cats or 2 in 5 cats enough to make the effort? And if it is, if we really believe that we should give those cats the best chance they have, then we can be strategic. We could just move young cats. We can obviously, clearly, if a cat is injured or old, we could euthanize it instead of move it. But we could make strategic decisions that would, I think, make the success rate much higher than that it currently is. And I think it would provide more options for state agencies, and it would allow the public who are interested in the individual lives of mountain lions to have something to push for and perhaps a greater representation in the way that we manage them today.
Yes, it sounds like there are a lot of variables to consider, and like you said, there's a lot more research that needs to be done to dig into it. You know, so it's just really interesting to kind of have a brief look at all the different facets that go into those decisions. But another question that comes up a lot is often pertaining to hunting. So in your book, you mentioned that mountain lion hunting is not necessarily a threat to the long-term sustainability of mountain lion populations. And this is, of course, looking at it from a strictly numbers standpoint. And you continue on to talk about how it is the greatest threat to the integrity of mountain lion populations. Can you explain the difference and what that means in terms of population health, as well as maintaining ecologically functioning populations on the landscape?
Sure. So yeah, this is an important distinction and an important topic to kind of, I think, be really just honest about. When we think about numbers, which is really the way that most wildlife managers are trained today, think of populations as a series of numbers or a series of individuals that are all equivalent. And again, you know, that's one of the reasons I emphasize that they're not equivalent, because that system is flawed right from the start. But in terms of numbers, when you manage a species and you're killing some, you're harvesting or whatever you want to call it, hunting some, and you're removing a chunk of that population each year, you can sort of build model and through experience learn that there's a certain amount of animals that can be killed while maintaining a population that is either steady or growing or, you know, slight decline. That's okay too from a managerial perspective, because then you just reduce hunting and it bounces back. That's called adaptive management. And so when you look at mountain lion population, and I would say what I would call the mountain lion superorganism, meaning like the entire population across the West, as it stretches all the way down to Chile and beyond, it's, you know, it's doing okay. And it's certainly in the United States and Canada as well. In terms of numbers, we seem to be, you know, just fine. It's a really robust number of mountain lions on the landscape. You know, I would hedge that with saying that we actually have no idea how many there are out there, and that, you know, the states that estimate population size are doing their best to come up with a guess that is defensible. Some states are better at it than others, but they're all guesses. You know, we don't know how many mountain lions are out there. And the problem is that we don't really know how to measure the health of a mountain lion population, or at least not well. Some will argue with me there, but let me explain a bit more. We don't know how many mountain lions used to be here before European settlement. So we have very little ways of sort of contextualize how many are existing today, or even understanding how they're doing. And even, you know, basically we're in a country where mountain lions are impacted everywhere. The leading cause of death for mountain lions is human beings, regardless of whether you're in a state where there's legal hunting or not. Both of those areas, humans are always the leading cause of death, whether it's vehicle strikes and depredation permits in protected areas versus legal hunting where it is allowed. And so it's very hard to find a mountain lion population that's natural. Like, how do we even find a population that we could study to say, oh, this is what a natural population looks like. Now we can compare that with every other population in the United States where we study them right now. And, you know, this is something Ken Logan, who's a long mountain lion researcher, has argued for geez, it's more than 20 years, 30 years. It's pretty much his entire career, has arguing that states should set aside big chunks of land, big enough to sustain a naturally functioning population of mountain lions, so that we have a reference for what is normal, so that we could then compare with it. But even then we're flawed, because, you know, pre-European settlement, there were wolves everywhere, and grizzly bears and jaguars even stretched partly into the United States and up the California coast. And so how do mountain lions exist or coexist with all those competitors? How many were there in a natural system? We have no idea. And so for these reasons, I just feel like we know so little that to argue we understand mountain lion dynamics is, I think, arrogant at best. And that kind of brings us to the next thing you were talking about, which is the integrity of mountain lions. And so we know for a fact that hunting changes mountain lion populations. You know, intensive hunting can actually eradicate mountain lions from small areas. But when they're connected to the superorganism, mountain lions come in from outside and they begin to repopulate and rebuild that population through immigration. And mountain lions are incredibly resilient. And so even as some places have reported in as short as 2 years, you can see a mountain lion population that was quite knocked back rebound. But usually 3 to 5 years is quite normal for a population that was beaten down through heavy hunting to bounce back, as long as that hunting pressure is removed and immigration is allowed to occur. But what happens when you're hunting that hard is you generally see a change in the number of males on the landscape, the number of females on the landscape, the number of subadults on the landscape. And so we change what we call the age structure or the sex structure of that population. Just to be flat out honest. I can give examples of what we do know, but in general, we have no idea what the consequences of those changes are for mountain lions. And I think it's really important that we focus future research to figure that out. We can look at other species, like for instance, in leopards, they found that when you hammer populations hard over many years, you see that dispersal changes. And some of the males that would naturally disperse begin to settle in home ranges that are vacant nearby. And they found that over time that creates genetic inbreeding and genetic erosion in a population that is heavily hunted over time. So we could see those effects. We can see, we have clear evidence that there's consequences for us because young animals that are hungry kind of fill in where these males have been taken out, and that increases conflict with livestock, increases conflict with pets. It actually, you know, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that it decreases safety for us as human beings when we're hunting beyond some threshold level. So, I mean, there's lots of consequences for us, but then on the lion side, we're just trying to figure it out. Some have speculated that, you know, if you put heavy hunting, that you'll see new males come in and they'll kill resident kittens. So all the youngsters will be killed because they're not related to them. And then they will, and that creates breeding opportunities with the local females, and then they can breed and establish their own genetic lineage. It's not a pattern that's actually really well documented in mountain lions. It's been very well documented in brown bears and other species, but it is speculated. And so, I mean, things like that, you know, this is what I mean by the integrity of the changes. So when you hammer a population, dispersal changes, sex ratios change, age structure changes, there's consequences for us in terms of conflict with mountain lions. There's consequences in how mountain lions are living. In Washington, they documented that males expand their home ranges in hunted populations, increasing conflict with each other. But again, this is a big area that we have a lot of work to do to figure out what are those, what I would call indirect effects of hunting on the health of mountain lion populations.
So it sounds to me like there are a lot of areas that warrant further research. It sounds like we don't necessarily know maybe as much about mountain lions as we do other species. So what are some of the areas that you feel would maybe demand immediate research or further study? And how would that knowledge benefit conservation efforts in terms of mountain lions?
These are good questions. I think that the area that I've just been rambling about would probably be one of the top priorities for me. We need to understand the impacts of hunting on the health of a mountain lion population, not the numbers of mountain lions. I think we've got a decent grasp of that. There's been some great work by Hugh Robinson out of Montana on some of the effects of hunting. David Stoner is one of the names on the papers out of Utah that looked at the impact of hunting in terms of numbers. The recent work led by Ken Logan in Western Colorado, which has now been released as a report just in the last month. Fantastic. It really shows like a clear tipping point. All these studies do sort of, when you kill so many mountain lions, if you hit this threshold, which is generally 12 to 14% of the population, you're going to see a decline in that population. That's great. Those are all numbers. What we don't know anything about is, again, the health. Like, when do we see ecological function of mountain lions drop? When do we see infighting increase in mountain lions? When do we see social structures and social communities of mountain lions begin to break down? At what level? Is it because we remove strategic, key individuals, or is it a threshold number of individuals? We just don't know. This is going to be really labor-intensive work to figure some of those things out. So that's one big area. We know much less about the dispersal of mountain lions than other aspects of their natural history. There's meaning like, what happens when a cat leaves home? So it leaves its mother and sets off on a journey. The technology's only recently sort of begun to catch up to allow us to follow cats in real time, to kind of see exactly how they choose habitat. These cats are constantly running into issues because they don't know where they're going. They're making snap decisions based on what's in front of them. They don't know what lies ahead. So they sometimes run into towns, they run into cities. Just here in Washington, the last 2 weeks, we had a young dispersing cat that swam a kilometer of salt water in the Puget Sound. I mean, you just never know where they're going to go or how they bounce. And so that aspect of their lives has not been well documented or understood. Fragmentation, is being studied more and more in Southern California. Look at Seth Riley's work with Jeff Sykich and John Benson, and they're doing fantastic work on understanding sort of the importance of fragmentation, or what was the threshold size of a piece of property that can sustain mountain lions. How often do they need to have immigration to sustain it genetically? I mean, there's lots of fantastic work going on, but that's an area that needs a lot more work. And then, to bring us beyond the United States, because we're all so US focused, when you get south of the US border, there has never been a long-term project of mountain lions. There has never been a study of the survival of mountain lions. Like, what are their main threats? There are still parts of their range where the IUCN lists them as data deficient, meaning they don't even know if they live there. We don't know where they are. We don't know how abundant they are in most of Latin America. So Latin America is, there's tremendous holes in our knowledge about how cats are living and what they're doing down there. And then the last, I know I could ramble on and on, but the last I think is really important is there is quite a bit of new research going on, but we have a lot more to learn about mitigating conflict. So what are the best strategies for allowing mountain lions to live in our backyards, but not eat our sheep, our goats, our chickens? And how do we increase that level of coexistence? And there are strategies that are proving successful, with fox lights, guardian dogs for sheep herds. There are things that are working, but this is ongoing research as well. It's like, how can we create that sort of safety network around human communities that allow mountain lions to still live with us, rather than just saying, let's just wipe them out so that we can live safely without them. We want to actually see coexistence.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there for folks who are maybe looking into learning more about mountain lions, say a young student who's like interested in mountain lions, they want to know more. It sounds like there are a lot of questions out there that are left to be answered. In terms of conservation, most folks want to get involved. They want to do something. They care about these cats. What are a few of the ways that people can get engaged in how mountain lions are managed by state agencies? Would you say that it's important for the non-hunting public to partake in the public comment process when state agencies are seeking input, and why?
Absolutely. That is a simple answer. State agencies, so the way the mountain lions are managed in the United States, it is essentially run by states and provinces. In Canada, I'm speaking for provinces. The only federal involvement in mountain lions is in Florida, because they're listed as endangered in that subpopulation. And so everywhere else, it varies by state, and every state is different. They have different regulations, they have a different approach, they have different rules. And so, I can't even sort of provide you like the blanket statement of how you get involved in mountain lion conservation, because you must do it on a local level. And what I would encourage, this gets into the whole history of state wildlife management, how it functions, and the money, and the on and on. And I think some folks will be surprised how much time I talk about that in this book, because it really comes down to that. You got to understand the system so that you can plug in. And those systems are, they are built on a customer service model. George Bird Grinnell, from many, many years ago in the late 1800s, suggested to Teddy Roosevelt that this is the way you build state wildlife management, is as customer service, and that you have constituents, and they pay for a service, and you, of course, provide them a service. And so that's just the way it's worked ever since. It has slowly tried to change, but there's a real inertia to kind of become more inclusive and to see greater input from a wider variety of types of people, including non-hunters. That's just the reality. And that's not a criticism necessarily, although it is. I'd love to see greater involvement of all types of people, but that's just the way it works right now. And so you know, the best advice I can give you is get involved, get out, meet your local staff, meet your local wardens, get to know their names, because I'll tell you, the ranchers in your communities, the hunters, they know their local staff. They know who they are, they chat with them, they visit with them, and that's the way it should be. They are part of your community, and you should know them by name. You should shake their hands once COVID-19 is passed on, and you should, you know, be part of their world. They need to know that you have an opinion, if you really have one, and you've got to participate. I would recommend buying a hunting license. I'm not saying go out and hunt. If you don't want to hunt, don't hunt. But buy a hunting license, because that puts you in the database and you get all their emails. And you get all the emails about public comments and, you know, periods and this and that. And you must get involved. If you are not participating, you are spectating, and that is it. You know, and I often, you know, kind of make a fairly harsh statement in saying that, you know, getting on Facebook and putting a frown emoji is not participating in the process. That is spectating, and it is actually not helpful. So I need people to engage, and organizations like the Mountain Lion Foundation, I mean, you have a tremendous amount of work in front of you to get people to engage and then to hold their interest, because it's not a one-time shot. It's not a sign a form letter and move on. It's, you've got to stay involved. You've got to be part of that world. Yes, I am absolutely advocating for real change in state wildlife management that allows greater public input at every decision as it's made along the way. But right now, the way it works, you've got to join the conversation, and you got to show up, you got to speak up, you got to call your politicians, you got to call your agencies, you've got to write letters. And in fact, I'll just tell you, I've been in meetings in the last year in several federal and state where those form letters are actually now being downgraded in terms of their impact or the way they're measured in public comment periods. So don't sign a form letter, write your own letter. And yeah, just jump in, join the fray, and stay there, please. We need you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And, you know, it can be intimidating at first getting involved in the comment process. But the folks that I've actually had the pleasure of working with and talking to actually want our input. They do want feedback from people, so they welcome it. So thank you for talking about that. I really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. We're actually going to transition now to the Q&A portion of the webinar, where people can ask you questions directly. And we have about 20 minutes for the Q&A portion, and we're asking folks to limit their questions to about 30 seconds so we can make time for as many as possible. Remember, if you want to ask a question, you'll need to use the hand raise function at the bottom of your screen. Ready for the first question. Who do we have?
Okay, it looks like Dan is our first hand. Dan, you can go ahead and ask your question now.
I can see the mute sign over Dan.
You'll need to unmute yourself, Dan.
Dr. Elbroch, this is Dan, and thank you for presenting today. At one time, I know that there were considered to be over 30 subspecies of mountain lions, but since that time, DNA research, I believe, has narrowed that down. Do we now know there is just one species of mountain lions and not numerous subspecies?
That's great question. Yeah, so the old days, you know, we've subspecies were all done on morphological differences. So the length of the skull and the foot, and they'd measure different things, the width and the proportions of the size of the body and the color of the coat. And, you know, back in those days, it was about 30 subspecies. And since then, we're down to 6 based on genetics. And, you know, within North America, it is kind of an important thing to think about, because it the evidence suggests that in the entire continent of North America, so we're talking about literally including all of Latin America, all of Central America, there are 2 subspecies, one of which is essentially just Panama and a little bit more. And then everything north of there, so all of Mexico, all of the United States, all of Canada is 1 subspecies. And this means, for instance, that they could bring mountain lions from Texas to Florida and mix them in and without any change in subspecies status. This means that there never was an eastern cougar, you know, the one that was listed as you know, disappearing a couple of years ago. It made the news for quite some time. That it actually never existed. And but which also means we could bring mountain lions from Idaho and drop them off in New Hampshire, and it'd be the exact same subspecies that historically was there. And so, you know, in some ways that kind of helps the argument for reintroducing them in the Eastern Range.
Hi, Trish, you're up next. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I would like to know, beyond a pair of breeding mountain lions, what would it take for them to come back to states where they've been extirpated, like Tennessee, Virginia, around the Shenandoah, places like that?
How would you get, so, I mean, there's 2 strategies there. One is natural, and, you know, cats are already dispersing east out of sort of their eastern limit right now. So sort of the Badlands and things like that. You know, there are cats moving into the Midwest. Some of, as you've no doubt heard, have made it to the East Coast, like the famous 2011 cat that died on a Connecticut highway. So it's already happening, but it's the rate of natural recolonization will be at the rate that females disperse, not males. Males take off on these incredible journeys all the time. And so it's going to take, you know, a long time to get to the East Coast naturally, following natural recolonization. And that's assuming that we just allow females to just bump out their sort of 15, 20 miles per year, moving eastward and recolonizing naturally. But unfortunately, the reality is that they're going to run into lots of obstacles along the way, whether that be an urban center, but more importantly, it'll probably run into issues with human tolerance. So people who have not lived with mountain lions for 100 years plus are suddenly faced with living with a mountain lion, and there's all that baggage again. There's all that mythology about what a mountain lion is, what the sort of perceived versus the real risks of living with mountain lions are. And so they get killed so fast that, you know, for natural recolonization to even occur at that slow rate, we're going to have to increase tolerance along the way. You know, we have to roll out the red carpet in many ways, doing education and outreach in front of them. The other way to do it, of course, is to carry them there, you know, to actually bring mountain lions from the west to the east and release them. To do that is, you know, a process for sure. It involves tolerance again, but it involves politics. And but a lot of discussion and mitigation of people's fears, ranchers or people with children. I mean, there are lots of folks who do not want to see mountain lions return to the east because they think it would increase the risks of living there. So all of those things need to be addressed. It's just the political, social landscape to facilitate that happening. But you know, the one strength that would support recolonization or moving, translocating, using that word we used earlier, from west to east, is the fact that it is the exact same subspecies. So functionally, there is no argument against picking up cats from Idaho, Montana, you know, anywhere, California, and dropping them off in New England or Virginia or wherever. There's no biological obstacle in the sense that it's a different animal. You know, you hear a lot, I even hear it still, the rumors that the wolves in Yellowstone are a different subspecies than originally there. They were brought from Canada. They're a different animal. Of course, that's not true. They're the exact same subspecies of wolves. They're the exact same as the wolves that are wild and where they were brought from in Canada. And it's the same thing moving west to east. They are the exact same mountain lion. And so in many ways, we've paved the way through genetic research to support moving cats from west to east, if the people want to do it. And that's really the big obstacle right now, is do people want to do it?
Thanks, Mark. Bob, you're up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Elbroch. Thank you for doing this webinar. It seems you are making significant discoveries regarding cougar society in your Teton Cougar project. And I have sort of a multi-part question. So first off, was the Cougar project canceled because of politics? And then the second part of the question is, what is your current project, and sort of what is your working hypothesis on the current work?
Okay, great. The Teton Cougar project ran from 2000 to 2017, one of the longest running projects for the species. A fantastic project. We're still producing a lot out of that data. I mean, it's just mountains of data when you work on a species that long in one location. Yes, politics played a role in stopping that work. We were told by the state agency and the U.S. Forest Service that they wouldn't renew our permits when they expired in that year. And a lot of that came from just, there was a lot of, not a lot, there were a few key individuals who were very powerful and very politically connected, who wanted to see us stop, who were quite anti-predator and just, yeah, that's just the truth. So there it goes. The U.S. Forest Service side was about public access to closures to protect elk, and they, sort of changed their policy over the course of the project, but they wanted to reduce human presence in these big, huge areas. When we say a closure, it's not like, don't picture a fenced-in area. It's actually just a big landscape where on a map they just draw a circle on it and say people can't hike in there. But we were allowed to because we were conducting research, and that actually was part of the friction with local people. Some local people really hated the fact that we could go in there and they couldn't. And I mean, literally that kind of argument came up again and again. So that was the old project. So that's what you wanted to know about that. And the current work. So one of the projects that we're putting a lot of energy into right now is in Washington, and it's on the Olympic Peninsula. And so that's west of Seattle for folks who don't know Washington well. And so the I-5 corridor running from Seattle to Portland, it's a big interstate, is one of the fastest developing regions of the West Coast. And so there's concerns that the Olympic Peninsula is really becoming the Olympic Island in terms of wildlife. And so there's some local wildlife doing, like the Olympic marmot, there's a pocket gopher here, there's the spotted owls. These are all species on the brink of disappearing forever, and they'll never naturally recolonize because of I-5. And carnivores too are having a problem. There's been modeling to see if wolves could naturally come back to the peninsula, and all the models say no, that I-5 will stop them cold. And there's some genetic evidence that mountain lions are suffering on the peninsula already from genetic isolation from the mainland. And so that's sort of the focus, is trying to figure out whether that's true or not, and how we can support connecting the Cascade Mountains to the Olympic Range again across I-5. I personally think it's one of the most amazing projects I've been able to work on because of who's involved. It's a huge collaboration. Everything we do is in collaboration with tribal nations on the peninsula. The Lower Elwha Clallam tribe is our main partner, like on every decision we make is made with them. And then we have 5 tribes that are right now who've signed formal MOUs to work together on studying mountain lions. And there's already a Wyoming Department of Transportation working group looking at connectivity across there with 25, 30 people involved. I mean, there's so much buy-in to making this work. And so that we have a natural place to give our data. It's not just a bunch of scientists say, let's make some data and hope that it gets used. There's actually a group already ready to intercept it and to actually build upon it, and to look at where we could build structures, et cetera, across I-5 to facilitate greater connectivity of all wildlife, but mountain lions being the focal species with which we'll test those things. And, you know, just to give you a couple of anecdotes quickly on that, I mean, we're seeing amazing things. We've only just begun this work. We're really looking at dispersal. Earlier I talked about dispersal being something that needs more attention. And so we've been tracking cats. We sort of catch them just before they leave their mother, and then we follow where they go. And, you know, the first cat that was caught by the Skokomish tribe tried to cross I-5 3 times, failed, and moved south, tried to cross the Columbia River where it was 4 miles wide, failed, moved to the Pacific Ocean, obviously not going to cross the Pacific Ocean, and then was killed by a hunter, so never left. And so the next male that we saw disperse, he died within 3 weeks of parvovirus, which is something they often catch in areas where domestic dogs walk a lot and defecate in the ground, and they catch it from the soil. We just had this cat swim part of the Puget Sound in his dispersal, and now he's died. In fact, tomorrow I join the Squaxin Island tribe to go and visit the site where his collar went on mortality to figure out what happened. But it's a horrific, terrible story so far. No cat has left the peninsula, and that's what we want to figure out is it truly a death trap right now? Is it a noose that is cutting off the Olympic Peninsula from the rest of the world? And of course, that has implications for everything: elk, deer, coyotes, anything that requires large populations and connectivity across landscapes.
Thank you, Mark. Donald, go ahead and ask your question.
Am I on now? Yeah.
You are.
Okay, somewhat related to your last answer, Mark, and public acceptance being so important these days with respect to the animal, I'm wondering, one of my pet peeves is the continued use of the word predator when talking about mountain lions. In human terms, now it may be that there's a common understanding among biologists and wildlife managers as to what that term includes and doesn't, but from a from a lay perspective, the term predator is a pejorative term. It means bad things. Human predators go to jail. Wildlife predators get killed. And so I'm wondering if, along with everything else we're doing, if we shouldn't think about wordsmithing our conversations about mountain lions in a different way and reduce or eliminate ultimately the use of the word predator.
It's a great point. Words matter, and they influence on who your audience will be. It'll influence what people hear and what they don't based on their own, perceived sort of perceptions of what it means, as well as their own values, right? And it is true that predator within wildlife management agencies, I think generally has a sort of a negative connotation. Sort of there's predator control. There's predator status in some states, which are species that are generally that there's open season on. You can kill them anyway, anywhere. You don't have to report the killing, etc. For instance, in Texas, mountain lions can be killed pretty much anyway, anywhere, and you don't have to report any take at all. And so that's because they're included in predator or vermin status. And so I think there's some truth in that. There is a different definition of predator used among some scientists, like in ecology. Predator doesn't have a negative connotation. So there is, some mixture, but, this is the reality that I think biologists and managers need to be aware of, is that it's fine that we have our own definition as biologists for something, but if the public has a different definition of what that means, that might actually carry far more weight. And that if our goal is to communicate what we're doing effectively and to just be transparent about what we're up to, that we need to speak in a language that is accessible and doesn't carry these negative connotations, as you pointed out. So I completely agree that should be something we should be discussing is, how do we want to talk about these species? Should we only say carnivore versus predator, or, or choose some other word that is perhaps even more neutral than that?
Thanks, Mark. Mike Hunt, you are up.
Hey, Mark. Can you hear me?
I can.
My question was, now that we're in shelter in place and COVID-19 going on, have you seen or heard what's happening with the relationship? Are there more mountain lions on the trails, on the roads, or less?
That's a great question. It's, you know, I won't claim that I've heard it all, but I've certainly, people send me a lot of stuff, you know, because of my interest. And there have been a lot of mountain lions in unusual places. And there's evidence that mountain lions that are being tracked by researchers are probing areas that they haven't been seen in before. So yes, they are responding to perhaps the silence or the lack of motion. You know, one extreme case would be Santiago, Chile, which is, you know, is a city of nearly 6 million people. And they, you know, within something like 10 or 14 days, they had 3 individual mountain lions that they removed from the city and allowed to release them out in the mountains. But there's been some since as well. And that city is, you know, on high alert. They really want to know why there are mountain lions coming back into their city. And so it's fascinating to ponder why. And so they're trying to answer the questions. And, you know, we actually have a conversation last week about this very question. And the truth is that's one of those holes. We don't really know a lot about why mountain lions come into urban areas or suburban areas more than others. A lot of the research that's done on urban or suburban populations is more about how are mountain lions living there? How are they surviving? What are their challenges? What do they eat? Those kinds of things. And that's critical information, but we don't really know like why a mountain lion does something. The only sort of real paper that's come out recently, I would say, is by Blecha and Matt Elbroch out of Colorado in the Front Range there. They actually, you know, came up and tested different models and showed that as cats, you know, the longer they had gone since their last meal, and we can infer that as hunger, the hungrier they were, the more likely they were to enter suburban environments and to hunt there. And so it sort of was like a risk thing, a risk threshold. Like once I'm so hungry, I'm going to take that risk and enter these areas where I know I'm going to, you know, have a chance of running into people, which is never a good thing. So since COVID lockdown, it seems that this again would support it, that it's become less risky. So cats are starting to be in areas where they just haven't been before, use areas and be seen at different times of days. You know, some folks are saying you're seeing cats in the middle of the day now just because you're at home, not because the cat's doing anything different. It's just that you're there now and you see it. That might be true, but we actually have no evidence to refute or support that idea. So these are the kinds of things, I mean, it's a fascinating question.
Thanks, Mark. Elaine, you are up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Mark, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great, thanks. So I've done some work with the New Mexico Game and Fish. I'm in New Mexico, and some of our organizations here are really involved with them. And one of the people who's in the Department of Game and Fish said that their salaries are basically paid by the purchase of hunting licenses. And so I was wondering if there was any value for people who aren't hunters, if there was a way to create something like a conservation license that people could buy that would also help pay these salaries as a way to kind of get involved in the conversation.
I think that's brilliant. And I honestly think that one of the best things we could do for mountain lions and wildlife more broadly is to diversify funds for state agencies. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a business model with customers that pay, meaning those who buy licenses, and then management decisions that, of course, sort of reach out to their constituents, the ones who are paying and buying licenses. And, you know, there is truth very much to that statement that state agencies, their two biggest sources of money are generally license sales, and then a federal supplement, which is generally referred to as the Pittman-Roberts and Robertson, excuse me. And so PR money, is you often hear that short term, and that's a tax on firearms, archery equipment, etc. And that is a big chunk of money that goes to state agencies, spread across state agencies that meet certain requirements. And most states meet those requirements because it's worth it. And so you have this disproportionate amount of support from the hunting community and the fishing community. I don't want to leave them out because there's now a sort of parallel funding source through another act that came up for fishing gear that feed and sustain these state agencies. And so they really do disproportionately, meaning hunters and anglers, disproportionately pay for state agencies programming, which includes all their staff, and it includes their non-game species as well as their game species. So if a state is doing land conservation for some sort of rare butterfly in the state, that too is supported by hunters and anglers. And it's something that hunters and anglers should be absolutely proud of. And it's something that we should all appreciate. But that said, one of the great flaws of our agency system is that financial reliance upon hunters and anglers is by design, and they actually actively block other sources of money most of the time because they don't want to diversify their constituency. And so they don't have to listen to people who don't buy these licenses or participate in their programs. And that is a major flaw for how state agencies function today, and it needs to be addressed. And like you said at the start, I personally think one of the best things we can do is diversify funding for state agencies. And there's lots of ways to do that. A conservation license, as you suggested, might be one way. Years ago, they tried taxing outdoor gear, which failed, was blocked by the NRA and many other groups because it would have diversified the constituency. And so now you've got, a new act that's passed the House that's now with the Senate, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is trying to figure out where the money would come for, but it would really be for non-game species. Of course, we need that money, and so I'm supportive in that way, but I'm not supportive of it as a long-term strategy because it doesn't fundamentally change the power structure and how money flows into these agencies. And so I think it's important to realize that, you've got a power structure that's built on money, and, adding more money into it doesn't change the structure, it just gives it more money. And so, but what you're talking about is actually creating a different revenue source that is attached to a constituent of people that would then become paying customers. And that is what needs to happen to fundamentally shift the power structure that currently exists and guides mountain lion management and all wildlife management across our country and Canada as well, because they have essentially the same system.
Thanks, Mark. I think we have time for one more question today. Pam and Randy, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Just had a quick physiology question. In Jim Williams' book, Path of the Puma, page 44, he states that cougars have evolved to be almost scentless to avoid detection by wolves and dogs. And we're wondering how this can be true if houndsmen use dogs to track the scent of cougars.
That's a good question. I've never heard that before. So I don't know what to say there. I hadn't heard that. I have read Jim's book, which is fantastic. I don't remember that. I've never heard that cats are scentless. They certainly have scent and rely on scent tremendously to find each other. Much of their territorial marking, whether it's rubbing on their cheeks or creating these scrapes with their hind legs, they are all based on scent. And of course, hounds follow scent. And so you're absolutely right. That's how hound hunting works. So I don't think I have too much more to say there because I don't know what to say. I don't know much about that topic. And so anything I say would probably just be ignorant.
Well, everybody, that was a great conversation. Thank you, Mark and Denise, for an inspiring talk that we've had here, and thank you everyone else for all your wonderful questions and for your attendance. Today's Living with Lions lecture is being recorded or has been recorded, and everybody will receive a link that was registered. We have more lectures, workshops, and conversations coming up, so be sure to check our website often. And if you want to buy the book, to pre-order it, you can go to islandpress.org. And if you type in all caps, Cougar, you'll get 20% off the retail price. Thanks again, everybody, for being with us today. Have a great evening and be safe and well out there, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.